Hello and welcome to Change Your Thinking, Change Your Body. Today I am joined by my guest speaker, Dr. Nina, and I just want to remind everybody to make sure you come to these events and these daily videos with a pen and paper, because I got to tell you, you're going to learn at least one or two things that are really going to be good takeaways for you. So I just want to keep that reminder too. Let me tell you a little bit about Dr. Nina. She is a psychoanalyst, an author, a speaker, and an internationally recognized expert in weight, food, and body image issues. Nina has been featured in the Los Angeles Times. This is very impressive, Nina. Prevention, Real Simple, Red Book, Huffington Post, and many other publications, and is frequently guest expert in summits like mine, so thank you, podcasts, radio, and events. Dr. Nina helps people lose weight without dieting by focusing on what's eating at them instead of what they're eating. I like that. I'm anxious to get to talk to you. I have to read some of these because I think this is quite impressive. In addition to her clinical practice, she writes an award-winning blog, Make Peace with Food, and hosts a podcast, Win the Diet War with Dr. Nina, and video series, The Dr. Nina Show, Losing Weight Without Dieting. And you have a book, Food for Thought, which I know we're going to talk a little bit about, and Understanding the Treatment of Eating Disorders, and that's on an Amazon bestseller. Oof, I got through all of that. I was very impressed with all of that, so thank you, and thanks for your patience with me reading with my glasses this morning, too. How are you, Nina?
I'm great. It's great to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us here today. And I know that our audience is going to come walk away with a lot of information. That's what I'm looking for, people to get a lot of information. You know, when your knowledge is power, right? When you know better, you do better. That's a Maya Angelou quote, and I love it. And so we're going to have a lot to offer today, too. So why don't you share your story? Why don't we get into that on how you got into this work?
Well, yeah, in addition to information, I also want to give some inspiration.
Yeah.
No matter how long anyone's been dealing with this, there's always hope. My story actually began when I was 5 years old, when I suddenly and randomly decided that my thighs were fat. I decided that if I had skinnier legs, somehow I would be better in some indefinable way. But this is my obsessive thought starting from when I was
5, wow.
And I should say, my parents were like ex-hippie college professors. They were not reading, my mom was not reading Glamour magazine. She was reading, Time magazine. They weren't watching TV. There were no media influences on me at all that would have made me think, well, I need to change my body at the age of 5. So this began my descent into what became an eating disorder nightmare. By the time I was an adolescent, I was just in a full-blown cycle of restricting and then binging and purging, and then that led to restricting again. And my whole life was numbers. If I look at my journal, every page of every journal was numbers: what I was going to eat, what I didn't eat, how many calories I burned, etc. Would I gain weight the next day, or would I lose it?
Right, it's a vicious cycle. I think I'm sure that everyone in the audience is going like, because I'm feeling that I'm like this. We've all been there at some point. So yeah, go ahead.
You're hiking with friends and not thinking, wow, it is a beautiful day. I'm hanging out with my friends. This is
right.
Wonderful. It was, click, 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 click. How many calories am I burning? So finally, after college, this went on through college. Finally, I went to therapy. And I went to therapy once a week for 3 years. And I told my therapist everything. I told her about, we talked about guy stuff, family stuff, career stuff, friend stuff, everything but one thing. I never told her what was going on with food. At first, I was too embarrassed. Well, actually, at first, I didn't want to give it up, because when I was in the restricting mode, I felt all powerful and proud of myself. So I was just like, I felt better. I felt better than other people because I could starve myself. I mean, how silly is that?
Right. What an empowerment. Yeah, right.
What a Pyrrhic victory. But in therapy, I began to change my relationship to myself, right? I learned to acknowledge what I was feeling instead of stuffing it or starving it. I learned to relate to myself differently. And by the end of that 3 years, without ever once having talked about food,
Wow.
all my disordered eating and eating disorders were gone, never to return. And people say, well, how do you recover from an eating disorder, 3 eating disorders, without ever talking about
it?
food?
Yeah.
And that is because food was never the problem. Food was a symptom of the problem, or even a solution to the problem, temporary solution, which was the real problem was my horrible relationship to myself, my feelings, my conflicts, and so forth.
Mm.
And by the way, why did I suddenly randomly decide that my legs were fat?
Mm-hmm.
So when I was studying to be a psychoanalyst and learning a lot about the unconscious mind, I finally realized that I was constantly being told as a child, you're too much, you're too loud, you're too sensitive, you're too dramatic, shh. And the message was that I was literally, I thought I was too much, literally. So in my 5-year-old brain, being too much for other people became literally being too much. And that is why all of this started. And so it's so important to recognize that there's something going on out of awareness sometimes, but not out of operation, that leads to whatever's going on with food. It's the weed, and you got to get to the root.
And it's interesting because that's exactly when it's embedded in the early stages of life, in the formidable years. That's why they call them that, right? And why you at 5 made that paradigm right for yourself. Interesting. Very interesting.
So that's why I do what I do. And that's why when I help other people, we're not talking about what's going on with food. We're talking about what's going on with them and how they're using food to comfort, numb, express, all kinds of different ways that people use food for different reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a frenemy. It's a friend. It does something for you. It's also an enemy. It hurts.
Enemy. And we don't know that we're getting into that. It's not so obvious, right? The comfort part of it. You feel good, but the connection is. How do you crack that code of emotional eating?
Well, you just said we don't know when we're getting. I'm going to answer the question a little bit circuitously. I had a patient who came in one day and said, maybe Dr. Nina, maybe your other people have like conflicts and emotions and they're emotional eating. She said, but she was a food addict, and she told me that she could prove it. And I said, because I do not believe in food addiction. If anything, it's an eating addiction, right? But not a food addiction. She said she'd been watching TV and chilling out and having a good time, and everything was fine, and she was relaxed. Nothing was bothering her, when suddenly Ben and Jerry's started calling her name. Nothing was bothering me. Clearly, I'm addicted to Chunky Monkey. I asked her, what were you watching on TV? And it was her favorite show, Charmed. She's like, see, I was watching my favorite show. I'm happy. There's no reason. So I said, what was the episode about? She's like, oh, it's when the devil comes and the sisters start fighting and it gets really contentious. And that's when she went, oh, and had her like Oprah aha moment of, oh, I get it. Because at that moment, she realized watching the show had activated all her sister stuff, because she had a very complicated, awful relationship with her sister. And before that could even reach her conscious awareness, she went to ice cream to divert and actually comfort herself. So had we been focused on ice cream, we would have completely missed the real problem, which was her difficulty with feeling angry feelings and knowing how to hold them, work through them, feel them, think them through. So to crack the code of emotional eating, you got to figure out what's eating at you. What do you do if, like my patient, you're so good at using food that you completely bypass what's going on? So I developed a food and mood formula. And basically, the kind of food that you turn to indicates the kind of conflict or need that you have. So in the case of the chunky monkey woman. Her name is Jenna. That's what I'm calling her. Not her real name.
Right. Better than Chunky Monkey, though, right? They're calling her that, yeah.
In the case of Jenna, so ice cream was a way of expressing a need for comfort. So anything that's smooth and creamy, like ice cream, pudding,
Yeah.
that kind of stuff, that indicates a need for comfort. So if those are your go-to foods, then you might want to think about, well, how else can you comfort yourself? How do you use comfort words instead of comfort food? The other category is things like bread, muffins, cake, pizza, pasta, those kinds of filling, bulky foods. And those are associated with filling a void and loneliness. So those are the go-to. Most people are either they're like an ice cream person, they're a bread, or they're a crunchy chips person. But if it's the bread kind of one, then you have to look at what are the holes in your life and how can you fill them in other ways than symbolically with food. So those bulky foods are associated with loneliness and emptiness. And the last one, the chips, anything with a crunch is associated with anger. So if those are your go-to, you might want to look at what is making you angry in your life other than you getting mad at yourself for eating chips. I should also say that there's nothing wrong with eating chips or having pizza or, having some cookies.
Right.
I'm not talking about in the context of kind of normal eating.
Right.
I'm talking about when you're using food to resolve something painful inside, when you're using food to feel better or to distract yourself.
Yeah, the distraction is what was coming up for me, for sure. People get like, what can I go and have? Yeah.
So that is my formula for cracking the code of emotional eating, because that will give you a guide to, okay, what really is eating at you.
How do your clients respond when you give them that information and sort of vet through what they're going through? How do they normally respond?
They always, whether it's my patients in my clinical practice or people in my online program, I hear from them all the time this, oh my God, that's so fits. People start crying. They feel really some relief, like, oh, there's a reason I'm doing this. And it resonates with them. It usually is like, that really resonates. I do feel that. And so it's a very powerful tool that I found that resonates with people. And even if they don't immediately resonate with it, and eventually when they start tracking it themselves, they'll come and say,
yeah,
you know what? I was mad.
Yeah. And that's the powerful piece, bringing it to their attention and then their awareness after that. After, I remember doing that for myself, that I'd be like, oh no, my God, this is why I just realized I was having thoughts of whether they were anxious thoughts or even happy thoughts. And it drew me to certain specific foods, which is really very interesting too. And I think, what's great about that? I know that this happened for me. Once I made the correlation, it was so much easier to not beat myself up about it and really understand what my next step is, what my next choice could be, instead of falling victim.
When you go from a place of, I have no willpower, what's wrong with me?
Yeah.
To, oh, this is my way of coping.
Right.
What am I coping with? The I have no willpower makes you feel terrible about yourself. And you feel like a loser, and you don't have willpower, and you have no control, and you're powerless. And that actually leads to more eating, just to get away from that horrible feeling. But when you look at it like, I'm trying to help myself, I'm trying to cope, but it's in a negative way. I'm using a deleterious coping strategy right now. Right. What else that gives you more sympathy for the fact that something's going on inside you that needs your attention, not your condemnation.
And why do you think that, I'm going to lump myself into all of this, why do we turn to food? What are your thoughts on why people turn to food versus something else?
Well, our very first experience of relationship of bonding, of safety, of feeling, loved and comfy and just all is right in the world is bound up with our experience of being fed. So if you think about babies as infants, and we're held in our mother's arms and we're secure, and mothers often, there's the eye contact and just the wonderful bond, the beautiful bond that gets associated with being fed. So somewhere in our psyche, food equals people, right? We don't think of it in that way.
Right.
But think about the way that we talk about relationships: hungry for love, satisfying relationships, fulfilling relationships. Even in our language, it ties certain kinds of needs for people with the same language we use for food. Now, people can be unreliable and unpredictable and unavailable. So unlike food, which is reliable, predictable, and available. And so often people turn to food because it is a safer kind of feeling than to people who can let you down and leave you empty and angry and upset.
Respond back to you the whole bit. Yeah. And it's interesting. So how do you find, let me ask this, because some people in the audience are probably saying, oh God, I don't know if I can figure out the emotions that I'm going through as to why I grabbed the food. And really, is it really got to be about that? I'm sure some people are thinking that, because I know I probably would. Like, really, do I have to do that kind of work? What would you say to me if I were feeling like that?
I would wonder why you had such little patience with your internal world. And I would wonder where you learned to be so impatient with yourself, and why you didn't have an attitude of curiosity about what was going on with you. Where did you learn to take this stance with yourself? Because is it really so much work to go, I'm eating pizza, maybe I'm lonely? Like, I would also say that it's easier to say, oh my gosh, it's so much work, I can't do that, it's too much, because it's easier to focus on food than it is to focus on needing comfort, feeling lonely and empty and angry. It's a lot easier. I had a long time ago, I have a free support group that I offer, and we were talking about these things in the group, and this woman was there for the first time, and she said, wait a minute, are you telling me that I'm eating because something is bothering me? And I said,
exactly.
That's exactly what I'm saying. She said, no, you're absolutely wrong. I'm eating because I'm a food addict. And she got up and walked out the door. I'm a food addict. She was so angry at the idea that something was happening with her in her emotionally. It was easier for her to call herself a food addict and say it was a brain-based this or that, than it was to recognize that there were some thoughts and feelings and conflicts within her that needed her attention. And that's part of it is our families, and part of it is our society.
Right.
We live in a society that says, don't feel your feelings. You're weak if you express your feelings, and you're strong if you don't. And a society that says, just think positive thoughts, and that'll get rid of all that'll just nullify and neutralize anything painful. It doesn't work that way. We're human, and part of our range of feeling human is to feel sometimes sad, mad, anxious, worried. All of these feelings are part of being human, but we learn, don't feel them. So what do you do with your feelings? We learn to stuff them.
And then no one teaches us any kind of coping skills that are more helpful, and we seek them out ourselves, which I guess is why the combat is, I don't want to have to look at that. I don't want to know that there are things within me that are causing that. And it's interesting, because I think it's like anything, even when you walk through the fear to accomplish anything, I'll just put it that way. Once you do it, once you look at it, it shrinks it, doesn't it? It like calls it out, and then it's not as big as maybe you were making it in your subconscious. That's what I found for me anyway. I don't know if you would agree.
It's always, I think people are always much more scared of their feelings than when
Yeah.
they actually feel them. It's a relief. And I tell them, like, look at kids. When they feel their feelings, they cry, they get mad, and then they're done.
Hmm.
You know, as counterintuitive as it sounds, the only way to get rid of feelings is to feel
Yeah,
them.
you know, go, yeah, let them out. Yeah,
If you push them aside, they don't go, they don't just disappear, they just stay there.
right,
And then eventually you feel the feelings plus all the disavowed feelings you've had.
right.
So just quick example, when I was in college, my roommate used to borrow everything. She would
Mhm.
borrow my clothes, she would borrow my computer, she would borrow everything. And by that, I would never get it back. And I was like getting madder and madder and madder, but I didn't say anything because I didn't want to cause any problems.
Right, right.
One day she's like, oh, can I just borrow your eraser? And I was like, no, you cannot borrow my eraser.
The eraser broke you. Yeah.
And she's like, oh my God, it's just an eraser. No, it wasn't an eraser. It was an eraser. It was jeans. It was a computer. It was this. It was this. It was this.
Right.
And that's what happens if we don't express it. They just build up.
Immediately.
And then
Yeah.
eventually it's all going to come out.
Yeah. And then you might not even know where it's coming from. You may realize, wait, oh my gosh, I guess this has bothered me because I haven't opened my mouth before now too. I think though, I want to give some hope and some promise that, even though we said society doesn't, really allow you to express your feelings, although the negative ones seem to come out nice and, ring true. People express their anger on the road, for example, at, inappropriate times. But I think though, through the work that you're doing, through the work that I'm doing, so, and many people that I'm coming in contact with, to really just make it a safe place for you to look at what's going on, right, in your head and what's happened in your past that's dragging it through the rest of your life. And I think that that's what it is. I think that that's what my passion gets all stirred up because it drags through all of our lives. I was an example as well. If and until you say, enough, I need to put this to rest. So let me figure out what it is, put it in its place, and move forward. And that's why I'm so pleased to meet people like you who are doing that work to really say it's okay. It'll be safe to share that, and and end that. We'll future's coming, but end that past thing that you keep dragging. Because again, when you know better, you do better, right?
Exactly. And the past is not in the past. It's alive in the present. Until you deal with it, until you resolve whatever was going on then, it's going to haunt you. And I tell people, hey, look, our job is to turn the ghosts of your past into ancestors in the ground. Because ancestors in the ground are in the ground, they don't bother you. Ghosts haunt you. And so to be able to recognize how's the past being repeated in the present, how are you relating to yourself in a way that you were related to, for example, it shifts everything. And then you can live your present and future free.
Right. With knowledge and power is really all that is. I don't want to sound so trite and cliche, but it is true. If I can out it, give it its voice, let it show its face, let me deal with it, and maybe say, well, wait a minute, that's not true anymore. Or, maybe I just put it in its place in a different way when I didn't know better. Right. So, I'm going to encourage everyone that we look at some of the things that stand in our way or have, and why and how we're, soothing ourselves with food. And I like the cause and effect. That's really going to be interesting, I think, the next time, because we all do it, right? Okay, so I go into the movie theater. I don't eat popcorn, I have to tell you, right? As soon as I get into the movie theater, I'm like, everybody's eating popcorn, and I've had that trigger. And what is that? And then I remembered thinking this, because one of my fondest memories, my parents didn't go to the movies all the time, but we certainly I guess every 3 months or so, they would take us to a drive-in. And we would have, it was a family time. And that's when popcorn, and she would bring stuff. We would even go to McDonald's. We never did that either. Like it was, so sometimes that association, to your point, And I think that, and I paid attention to that because for me, it was like, I don't even eat popcorn. Why do I want it? Like, what is that all about? So it made me think about it. Yeah. 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 So let me ask you, what today, given our conversation, what one thing do you think people could do today to start making changes that'll help them move forward or aware of this? I mean, I know we talked about a few things. What would you say?
The most important thing is to watch the way that you speak to yourself, because what I hear a lot are people that talk to themselves in such a cruel, harsh, awful way that they're using food just to escape their own mean voice. So there's a great quote. It says, if you talked to your friends the way you talk to your body, you'd have no friends left. Well, if you talk to your friends the way you talk to yourself, you'd have no friends left. Because I find that people are often horribly mean to themselves and say things that they would never say to somebody else. So, for example, someone said the other day, she's like, oh, I ate like 4 pieces of pizza and I told myself, God, you have no willpower. You're never going to lose weight. You're awful. You suck.
Right.
And, yeah. And so first of all, I said, what would you say if a friend of yours said to you that she ate all that pizza? Would you say that? She's like, oh no, that's so mean. I'd say like, maybe there was a reason. It's not the end of the world. And what was going on with you?
Right.
And so the way she would talk to a friend was completely different from the way that she talked to herself. Now, the way she talked to herself, and I find this common, is she went from I ate all this pizza to you have no willpower. You. So really watch if you talk to yourself in second person, which is the you, how harsh that is, because often that's your inner critic. And if the more that you can identify and catch your inner critic and think, wait a second, would I say this to a friend of mine? What would I say to a friend? And talk to yourself and respond to yourself in a nice way. Then you don't need food to cope because you're coping with words.
Yeah, no, I think that's important. I think that trigger of, would I say this to my best friend or someone I love very much, right? Would I say that? And maybe that's the one step today. Ask yourself when the thoughts come up, what would I say to my very dearest friend? And it likely wouldn't be that. I mean, I happen to be a blunt friend in terms of like what's going on with you, but I would never speak harshly. And I think that's the key.
I would say be curious, not critical.
Curious.
I tell people, again, in my online program, they say eventually they hear themselves going, oh, wait, be curious, not critical. So it's easy to remember. And all my group, my patients, they're all like, be curious, not critical. It's this mantra. Because critical is being mean to yourself.
Right. It's that finger wag.
Curious is, So, critical is, why did I eat that? And curious is, okay, why did I eat that? What's going on with me? So if you adopt a stance of curiosity rather than criticism, you're gonna have a nicer relationship to yourself and find the answers and be less likely to turn to food to escape yourself and the bad feelings.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. That's the best thing. So the awareness and be curious as to why. What is that curiosity? Yeah, I think we lose that curiosity. Yeah, we're always so curious as children, aren't we? We question it all the time. Why is this? Why is that? It's always right. And then the parent goes like, because it is, right? So, yeah, and I think
a 9-year-old daughter who, keeps me the way she sees the world and the things that she asks. It's too bad that we lose that sense of interest and wonder.
I know. A lot of times you'll hear me say I birthed my children because my teachers, of course I birthed my children. I birthed my teachers because sometimes they say things, reflect it back, and I learned from them, because it is that I found that I've made the switch to stay curious because it wasn't working for me. I was getting pissed off at everything, and I was talking like that to myself, constantly beating myself up, and I didn't recognize that I might have been afraid to expose what it could have been until I just said, well, I'm just talking to myself, I'm just going to find out about myself. And it's very interesting because once you stay curious, the questions that you ask and the answers that come back, then you can make your decision. I think that that's what's interesting too. I have to thank you for today. I thank you for the work that you do. And I feel like I've made a new friend. And I really appreciate everything that you've had to say for everyone today too. I know that at least one person is walking away today going, I could do that. I can make that one. I think so. I think so.
Providing this opportunity for so many people.
So tell us, I know you have a free gift for the audience. When do you want to tell a little bit about it?
Yes, it's called Stop Stress Eating. I give you 25 ways to cope without food. Right? Because sometimes, okay, I'm using food to cope, but what else do I do? And so this is a guide of 25 proven scientific strategies to help you do other things. And I give you a lot of links and resources and help you in those moments when you're trying to cultivate a new way to respond to yourself. You could just be like, okay, I know I'm coping. I'm being curious. I know I'm coping.
I'm doing it all.
So how else can I cope? And that guide will give you some strategies.
Oh my God, download that today. Thank you. That's a very generous gift that you're giving everybody. Appreciate that. I'm anxious to see it myself. Yay. Thank you so much. That was great. I enjoyed talking with you. And thank you everyone for joining us today. And there'll be more. So stay tuned. Yes, always bring a pen and paper because you never know what you're going to hear. Thanks so much. Have a wonderful day. Much love. Bye-bye.